What is your worst experience with bad neighbours? We had some neighbours that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day, instead of putting it in a bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning, there's garbage strewn all over the neighbourhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around. The wind picked up the slack. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go fuck themselves. Thus began the garbage war. Every morning of garbage day, some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back into the dude's back. He would collect it, then dump it back on their lawns, or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The streets started to look like a slum. Police were called, health inspectors, city by law enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in check. The dude and his family, amazingly his wife, seemed perfectly pleasant. Lasted about 8 months, then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. Edit. Spelling. Apartment building, the upstairs neighbour's dog peed on their patio, and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading. I yelled and ran to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in future, they said it wasn't their dog, and it must have blown over from somewhere else. They were crackheads. They had 2 kids, were physically and verbally abusive to each other, and were hoarders on top of it. Tried, called Child Protective Services and the police over and over, and was never taken serious. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damage to the rest of the apartment building because they were cooking that. We had to move out, as did many others. The silver lining is that they finally got their kids taken away after that. I lived in an apartment with slot of rotating tenants. An elderly lady moved in across the hall from me, promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck/porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including but not limited to a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, I started to realize I hadn't seen her in a while and started to smell something real weird. Turns out she had died, and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all her stuff about. A week after that, this is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Marten work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out, and then stole them when they were done. Had one that would basically steal our mail and shit. Caught her once to confront her, and she started yelling at me to stop, attacking her and tried to say I was stealing her stuff. Ended up with the police. My mum has a neighbour who literally looks through her window to try to see into the house. She's had to call the cops on her multiple times. My neighbours create this toxic smoke out of their chimney. We suspect that they're making drugs. My neighbour once shot both my dogs and his goat and made me bury both. One dog survived, thankfully. He then tried to make us pay for a new goat, claiming that our dogs attacked. The goat had bullet wounds and no bite mark. He lived in the apartment right below my husband, and it went from constant complaints to him calling the cops in us multiple times to him leaving threatening message on our car and front. When we first moved in, he was upset with the landlord for renting above him, left plenty of unpleasant notes and interrupted quite a few times when we were talking to the landlord. When we moved in, we only had a mattress and no other furniture, but he kept calling the landlord saying that we were moving furniture around at home and had our televisions full blast. After the 8th complaint in 2 months of us still moving around furniture and television being too loud, we finally just showed our apartment to the landlord. We literally didn't have a television and still only had our mattress. Then the neighbour started leaving notes on our car telling us to keep it down. He even put in writing there needs to be no noise after 10 or else I'll call the cops. We usually didn't even get home until after 11, and we were respectful to make sure we kept things down because we knew that not everyone had our work schedule. So we tried keeping it down even more, and there were so many instances when we'd be eating dinner or cuddling quietly, or even sleeping and he'd be banging on his ceiling / our floor. After a few months, he started calling the cops, and it got to the point where even the cops told him to stop calling about a noise complaint because it's a landlord issue, and every time they came, they never heard anything. The last time they showed up, I was asleep, and my husband ended up talking to them and explaining everything. They suggested that we file a harassment complaint. Then the cops showed up at the coffee shop I worked at the time and explained that they were getting almost nightly calls, and they suggested to me too that we should file a harassment complaint against the neighbour. Then he started leaving threatening notes on our car and front door, and we kept hearing our doorbell jiggle. He claimed that he and a friend had sat outside our apartment for 2 hours and listened to all the moves we were making. He's a retired cop and will call in a few favours if we continue making noise. He knows where we park our car, so we better start parking it somewhere else if we didn't want it to get damaged, etc. We kept the notes and made copies for the landlord and let him know that this was what we were dealing with, so we're just keeping him in the loop. The last complaint was when he ran outside to the landlord, screaming that something needed to be done about us because he heard our bed squeak the night before, and how dare he rent to some crazy college kids who were partying and having sex all night. The landlord finally told him to fuck off and stop being a bitter old man. Then the neighbour took a total 180, and we found out that he had decided to sue the landlord and was moving. Suddenly, the neighbour kept offering us rides when one of us were walking. He stopped complaining and leaving notes, but our doorknob kept jiggling and turning at around midnight, and whenever we would check on our door, we'd hear someone running down the hall as we'd approach our door. He eventually moved away, and shockingly, we haven't gotten a complaint from any other neighbour in the last 3 years we've lived here. Just straight-up rednecks who wanted the full neighbour experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune where you could just demand things of your neighbour. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours, but shared because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumber yard / playground where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No bullshit, they're mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old / handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often and at some pretty irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they moved away / got kicked out / went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said immortal death in a red gradient. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night, all cut up. Who knows if that is true? But if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities because this comment is getting some attention. Lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe on their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head, and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights they used to put these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck. More like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mum watched him do it, and I specifically remember her saying he's got to learn somehow after he fell. Edit, thanks for the awards. Yo.